I'd like to actually kick things off. Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your role there and about Uptake Technologies?
So I've been at Uptake for, I think, 3 months on Monday officially. So it's kind of a new transition, but a lot of what I see my role as is trying to find ways to improve and add value to the overall company from the financial perspective. I oversee the financial operations division, so things like AP, AR, financial reporting, and just trying to help the business sustain its growth from a financial point of view. Some of the things I'm really passionate about and some of the things I was even advocating before my boss hired me was I want to make sure that our technology is as efficient and automated as possible. It's kind of something I picked up at my last job. I really saw the benefits from a well-designed automated process and having a lot of integrations and making sure that your technology can do most of the legwork for you.
Great, thank you. And Mark, please introduce yourself and tell us a little more about LockerDome.
We developed a native ad serving platform, and it's a technology that's driven by machine learning and AI to deliver ad units, native ad units, who are all really provided by performance-based marketers or direct marketers to the bottom of online publishers' articles. And those articles are all, they have they're affinity driven. So if a campaign or a product is related somehow to a specific article, we believe, and the data proves out, that the reader of that article has a much higher likelihood of clicking through and tracking through and ultimately swiping their card to purchase the product. I joined as the 13th employee. We were pre-revenue up through the second quarter of 2015. Today we don't have 800 employees, but we've got 60 employees. We feel we're about a $20 million trailing 12-month revenue. We've been funding growth out of free cash flow for about 2 years now, and AP and AR and cash flow is really important for a small company like ours. The accounting and admin and finance function, which all kind of rolls up to me, is very lean. So when we talk about how manual processes are really challenging, when you don't have many manuals, it is that much more challenging. So.
Yeah, interesting. And sticking with you, Mark, on this, because a lot of people, they're out there on the web or in online shopping communities and whatnot, but I'm just curious, the business model really of LockerDome, how you generate revenue is you have partners and you have advertisers, and how does that all work?
So we have these performance-driven marketers or direct marketers, and we charge all of them on a cost per 1,000 impression basis. So we will set them up at, say, in a cost per 1,000 impressions, so CPM is the acronym. We charge them on the amount of ad units that we deliver to our partner publisher platforms, our partnership platforms. But we really the performance, or our performance, is based on how is our client doing. And what we track these campaigns by are cost per customer acquisition. So what is it? So our clients provide us with the predefined number. What is that cost per customer acquisition if they're a political, if it's a political campaign, maybe they're trying to acquire, email addresses. How much do they think it's going to cost to acquire that email address? If it's Mack Weldon, how much does it cost them across their social media spend for someone to buy a new set of socks? And what we do is and we can show those clients of ours in real time what their cost of customer acquisition is. As long as we're hitting those numbers, they tell us to spend or to deliver as many ads as we can within that range. So that's how we deliver, that's how we generate our revenue. The key for us, though, is really supply. And supply is the inventory, or those ad units that are in the middle of an article or at the bottom of an article, and that which is predicated on us reaching out to publishers both directly and pre-negotiating what we're going to pay them to place that ad unit, or through a more programmatic method in which we're working with networks of publishers and have to really work in what's called a unified bidding atmosphere. But that's really the model, and keeping our publishers happy and paid on time and the way they want to be paid is very, very important for us.
Andrew, slightly different question, but tell us again, you mentioned technology that was a key thing or automating things, but right now, what is the finance team doing really to support the mission of Uptake right now, all the things that you're touching?
You almost start with like your base level of what's the operationals piece. Are you making sure that invoices are paid on time? So a lot of what we can do is pay anything from trying to help our customers actually acquire various devices that we hook into and then pull data insights out for our platform, and trying to make sure that those are paid on time and capturing that, to anything from we have a lot of contractors. So we have some contracting companies where we could have 50 to 100 people, and we have some contractors that are just like one person working for us, and trying to make sure that they're all being processed through and paid on time. Because if they're not paid on time, they tend to let you know about it. So there's a lot of just trying to make sure we can capture all of that information, make sure it's paid, but then, you know, from there, that's like the base level, and that's just kind of like the expectation. So what we try to really do in the finance organization is try to understand what's happening in that information, where we can glean some insights, almost like our product does, and try to provide that information to our leadership team and say, this is what's going on, here's the data, here's how it's trending, these are things we think that you might be able to take advantage of, or just know what's going on in the business, and so that there are no surprises.
Okay. Taking a step back, Mark, just tell us about, as a CFO, as someone in finance, any philosophies you have for your team, for how you want to approach your finance role?
That's a really good question. And it can, as I mentioned, we're still pretty small, so I have to deal with a lot of different, put on a lot of different hats. For our finance team, it is we just keep everything very, very simple, and it's all about billing on time, collecting as quickly as possible. It's making sure our vendors are as happy as they can be, meaning paid on time, right? And doing all that with an eye towards profitability. So it's managing cash flow in a profitable manner. The way we built out our technology, we were able to kind of pull levers, if you will, with KPIs that are built into the actual platform, so that we can deliver units and in a profitable manner and back them up and back them off. So we can do that at a gross margin level and at a net margin level as well. So it's straightforward. It's how do we manage cash flow, and how do we do it as profitably as possible.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, for you, an up-and-coming finance professional, new actually to Uptake, but what have you brought a philosophy to your team as you approached your role there?
I'd say my number one philosophy is always trying to be better, and like this is something that I think I've applied to every company I've worked at, and everyone who's worked for me, is take every day and try to figure out how you can improve just a little bit, how you can make processes better, question what you're doing, question how the system's working. It's all about those just little improvements every day that over time add up and they make a big impact. So not necessarily directly related to technology, but that's my overall philosophy.
Great. Let's get into the financial operations of your companies, and with LockerDome, Mark, you guys went from zero cash flow to tens of millions now.
We had significant negative cash flow.
To start off. So as you guys grew, what were some of those challenges in your financial operations, and describe how that was holding you guys back a little bit?
Yeah, as the velocity, and in reference profitability, I'd also like to say that we really focus on growth as well, and profitable growth. But for us, as we began to scale, and as our operations scaled, we recognized that we were managing everything on the finance and accounting side, admin side, very manually, which is what any startup is going to do. And from our perspective at LockerDome, we try to address everything in a manual manner until they become choke points or bottlenecks, at which time we automate. So we found that one of our bottlenecks, or our tamping of growth, was that we couldn't onboard our publishers, or onboard our inventory, if you will, quickly enough. And the velocity of onboarding that inventory really impacts how much we can grow our top line. So beyond worrying about leakage or what we were going to do with losses because of manual errors, we were having our growth tamped because we couldn't get our publishers onboarded quickly enough. And what did that mean? That really meant it wasn't just our sales guys who were out there trying to get new distribution. It was about the sales folks who would sell those, not just on the advertising side, but on the publisher side. They would sell their point of contact, but then for us at the accounting and finance function to get the payment terms down, payment methodologies down, the tax forms collected was just a pain in the ass, right? And nobody on the other side really cared about that. All they cared about was how much revenue you're going to generate for us. And our guys just wanted to know how performant, which isn't really a word, but our team came up with it. How performant can that inventory be? And yet, here we would start to push revenue through that channel, and we wouldn't be able to pay them because we didn't have an automated enough, efficient enough methodology to capture that information.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, you came on board, and Uptake had already started to address some of the challenges around your payables operation, but describe kind of the scope that you were at and why it was becoming a challenge.
So, I mean, going back to Uptake's had some very tremendous growth cycles over the past couple of years. We're talking just massive increases in professionals, and I think we have a finance team of 4 people, including the controller at that point. So trying to just process all of that incoming volume very manually was taking up almost, I imagine, a good chunk of our team's time. I think an entire professional was spending weeks just cutting checks. Even trying to keep track of those invoices is something that was very challenging. Going through the process and looking at it now, when we've actually gotten through that process and just being able to see what our team can do and where we can start to add value and transparency, like trying to transform our payables professional from just sitting there and cutting checks all the time to working with purchasing, trying to validate those invoices, making sure they're correct, making sure that people have actually approved this, having all of the documentation laid out in front of you, and then making sure that it actually gets fed into your financial system, because I think that's probably the theme you'll be hearing from me a lot of the times. Is my biggest heartache necessarily isn't the actual day-to-day operations. It's trying to make sure that the information is collected on time and gets fed into your financial systems. I guess it's just a holdover from being an auditor back in the day. But like that sort of process was just weighing the team down and keeping us from really doing anything where we could provide a lot of value.
Mm-hmm. Mark, you were touching on your publisher partners. Describe now why it's so important to have the ability to just onboard them in an efficient, streamlined way, tax compliant way. How is that helping you guys?
Well, as I mentioned, in terms of kind of velocity of inventory, or the ability for us, we live in a world it's a supply side world. So we believe, and we have plenty of demand for anything we can provide within our customer base. It's our choke points are supply, and supply is all about that. Is about interacting with those publishers and getting that inventory. We pay out, in terms of just payments, we pay these guys, these vendors, if you will, and this is from our cost of goods perspective, 30 days, 45 or 60. But the bulk are paid on a 45-day net basis, and within that, so what it means is that we are processing publisher payments for the 15th of the month, and then we're also processing another set. So we have a second cycle at the end of the month. And of those, we have some that want to be paid ACH. Much like all of your businesses, you have ACH, you have wires, you have checks, you have some PayPals even, and managing that was really challenging. Today, because we have the means in which to onboard very quickly, we don't have that choke point from our account managers. The account managers can go out and bring in new publishers. For us, from a payment perspective, there's oftentimes those publishers who want to stay happy, but there might be a disconnect within their own organizations between their account managers and their accounting people, where they keep coming back and say, hey, we need to see a receipt, or we need to see the schedule of payments that you paid. Previously, it was really challenging to do that. Today, it's very easy to say, hey, here it is. Here, go look at it, or we'll do a screenshot and send it to you. So we really have, and we've freed up a lot of people's time that was very manual on, and we still have modeling and overlays and kind of movement in and out of our accounting system, but it has freed up the time of team members to be able to focus on much more high impact and higher leverage tasks.
And Andrew, for you guys, it's a lot of vendors that you're onboarding, people that are contractors as well. Describe then the ability to have that so streamlined and automated, almost flipped, if you will, to put on them. How has that helped your team and just the data accuracy?
Yeah. So, well, the data accuracy is a lot better. A lot of the transparency is there, and like Mark was mentioning, we actually get to go back now and look at the actual invoice and be able to see how it was coded. The level of data and the granularity that we're able to go back is astronomical. I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
Well, we're talking about just getting them into your systems to be payable. That whole onboarding piece is kind of a thing out there that can be risky.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, even going back to like tax compliance is something we actually got a friendly notice from our local government the last couple of days saying that a couple of the vendors had the wrong names on there, because when we're dealing with a large amount of sole proprietors just collecting the tax forms from contractors who necessarily aren't used to providing these level of tax documentation can be very, very challenging, and there's not a huge element of risk, but a little bit of annoyance and manual time that has to go in there. And so now that we have Tipalti doing most of that legwork for us, we basically can just pass that through to an e-filing system, and it handles most of our work. So to a point now, it's like I have to struggle and kind of figure out what actually are we doing, because I've largely almost forgotten about a lot of that work. So our team members are now doing things to go back and add value to the business, do some analysis, and really making a difference.
Mm-hmm. If I could, Scott, also one of the benefits we've found also is that the trust that we've built up with those vendors, in that they're getting paid on time, they're getting paid by the way that they have asked to be paid. They don't have to worry about, we've got their tax forms and all that. It enables them to provide us with more inventory. So we've been able to increase the amount of spend through a lot of that channel, simply based on the fact that they believe that we're going to pay them. Because a lot of ad tech or media companies will provide a lot of, there will be a lot of lip service, but without having really strong transparency and ability to deliver, there's going to be, they are oftentimes kind of skeptical. So we've been able to scale a lot of spend with these guys just because they feel better about what we're doing.
Nice. Okay. Mark, sticking with you, just today, describe then kind of the workflow you've implemented now on your payables operations compared to how, you started out cutting checks and having to go into bank portals and whatnot. What's happening today?
Yeah, I think I've kind of talked about it a little bit, but so 4 years ago, we went in setting up a wire for somebody. Each month, you'd have to go into the bank's treasury management portal, which is just not just cumbersome. It's dinosauric. I mean, they're just awful. And it didn't matter whether it was our primary small bank, or we were working, which was like a middle market bank, or with JP Morgan. We were working with Chase as well. They were just shitty kind of portals and treasury management. So, and going through those ways, whether it be setting up the ACH, which is, the credit and debit and like each time, right? Or be setting up the wire, and there's it's so many touches. And so it's so cumbersome, so inefficient. And then at the end of the day, or the end of the month, if you will, you don't have good reporting out of that, right? You can't just pull how many do we send on this date. It's really hard to get it. So moving from that, like from that environment that was so cumbersome to a situation we have today is really we have some specific models that are built in Google Sheets, and we pull data out of our platform, and we pull data and we overlay it with data that we pull out of our accounting system, and then it's gone from days to hours, and it's just invaluable when you can pick up that kind of time for your team.
Yeah, and you mentioned too that you guys work on a performance basis, and so you have internal systems that tell you what you're going to pay your suppliers, your publishers, and then you just simply
so we don't deal with invoices. So the bulk of with a regular, whether if it's AWS or Google Cloud or fill in the blank, regular vendors, but with our publishers, they have to trust us for the delivery. And we show them dashboards. They have access to dashboards to see how many ad impressions have been delivered, what their daily, monthly, kind of revenue generation on their side is. But we don't have that kind of invoicing set element to it. So we do have to be very, very cognizant of that trust factor. And by being able to kind of show, hand back kind of this is what we did and how we did it through Tipalti has been very beneficial.
All right. And Andrew, now describe your workflow today. I know it's a work in progress because you're still ramping things, but I mean, compared to how things were before, just in the workflow of an invoice comes in, what happens at Uptake?
Well, I'd say one of the things is we're still building out our processes, but one of the things we're trying to do is leverage Tipalti as like the base, as like this is your milestone. Process starts not when someone sends an invoice to like some random person at Uptake and they just kind of gets in their inbox for a while, which happens. It starts when an invoice goes into Tipalti, and at that point we start an entire flow of coding it, going through. We have an AP professional now who codes it, and the amount of time there is pretty much cut down from where it was. It now then moves through an approval chain, which I would say one thing that we have really done since we've actually picked up Tipalti is the amount of controls that we have around invoices that we process and how we process them has increased as we have put the invoices that are in front of more people and making sure that, hey, are you okay with this? Did this actually happen? Should we pay this? Which I love controls, so that makes me feel so much better. Moves through there, and at that point what we do is we actually have scheduled payments, because a lot of these invoices, a good chunk of them are due towards the end or beginning of the month, but now we're starting to schedule payments, so after it's been approved we just process it, we sign it off and we forget about it, and then the checks get cut. And I think for us kind of some of the horror stories I hear about how we had an associate who was just cutting checks for a long time and then going to the CFO and having the CFO sign all of the checks and then getting those mailed out. And now the fact that I don't even think about payment after it's been processed. Right now it's just going around trying to collect all the approvals, which can be a little bit like herding cats, but it is what it is. But after you get that done, it's done.
Mark, you were just touching on some of the benefits. As a CFO now with your team as well, with so much efficiency in the payables operations, describe how you're, some of the value you're gaining about just having more time, and what do you want your team to now be doing?
I'd like them to get down the sales floor and sell more. So one thing I didn't touch on that we were just talking about is that for us, we pay on the 15th to our publishers on the 15th and the 30th. But we have to plan that out. Like it's interesting that's how you guys do, because you get them ready to go and then they scheduled out. For us, if it's an ACH, we have to back out 4 days, right? Maybe it's a fifth day. If it's a PayPal, now that we're paying PayPal through Tipalti, we're not doing on the day on the 15th or the last day of the month or whatever that day is. We're taking an extra day. If it's an e-check, now we're starting the process. If it's payments on the 15th, we have to have that accounting manager, the accounting staffer, looking at things on the third of the month. So, but the ability to schedule it out and to be able to back into when those payments are going to be delivered has really, again, freed up time. And for us, it's freeing up time to work on more, as they say, higher leverage things to help on analysis. We're a both venture-backed companies. Mm-hmm. You know, we need to keep from a finance perspective. And again, a small team. I need those resources to help me tracking comparable companies, looking at what we're trying to do from financing analysis, looking at in terms of what are our real KPIs that should be. We've got KPIs that have to do with HROI or ROI and gross margin, but are there other places we should be looking? Do they need to be helping on other elements of it? And it has been able to free that up. So and to be able to provide a little higher degree of training, if you will. Like, hey, maybe you can you don't have to run around with a check and get somebody to sign it. That doesn't happen anymore. Let's have you do this. And so it's really been very helpful.
Great. Andrew, same question for you. Just some of the benefits that can be gained from with your team now having so much more time. How are you utilizing that?
Well, fixing other issues is kind of the short answer to that. Because I don't think I'll ever be satisfied with any system, going back to that, always trying to make things better. But AP process is probably at this point is pretty clean, it's pretty straightforward. Once something goes in there, like, it happens. So I've transitioned our team to looking at, invoicing. How can we make invoicing better? Trying to, we have a good amount of equity and employee ownership as well as venture back and stuff. So trying to make sure that there's some transparency there. Also, like, just trying to get our standard, like, financial reporting practices up to speed. Because I know it's like, Ryan and I'm sitting here talking like we're a really large company, but like Uptake's still it's probably a mature startup company. We're not talking like a enterprise, like 10,000 person company. So we're still trying to get a lot of our basic financial reporting practices and controls and processes streamlined and automated too. So there's a lot of work to do, but at this point I'm just very thankful that we're not trying to automate this process, and we can kind of move on to the next project.
Mm-hmm. Mark, closing out our discussion, for folks that are in the room that might be looking at taking on a payables transformation, any words of advice or any fears you would say, hey, you can alleviate?
I've been thinking about that question this morning, and I think that I would really suggest that you do go out and look at who are those batch processing kind of AP payment platforms, and look at Tipalti and don't have enough confidence in your team that you can implement it and you can utilize it and you can get it up to speed. And recognize those efficiencies and productivity gains is in a very, very short order. It is not and so don't be scared of moving to a platform like this. That's my thing. And if someone were to ask me, like, what would you do? I would try to get here quicker, right? I don't need to iterate multiple times on kind of halfway solutions or try to do it too much more manually. It's get here as quickly as possible and get on the implementation, and the implementation is really not that painful, and it just is. You can really recognize dramatic improvements very quickly.
Great. And Andrew, you can take that question on as well, or because I think you've answered kind of prior. I was going to say, what are you doing now? Because you've kind of had success.
Yeah.
You've answered that. How about the same question? Just words of advice.
When you're looking at the actual, you're considering an implementation or looking at what's it called?
Payables transformation.
Payables transformation. I would just say that just buying the software is not the only thing that's gonna make the process work. One of the things when I first started trying to integrate and implement and automate processes that was very humbling for me was just how challenging it actually is. you have to make sure that you have your head wrapped around the data, like just the very nuts and bolts about how the data works, how it flows between the systems, and what you actually need to capture. You need to understand what you want to get out of it from even a reporting process, and make sure your data is structured for that way. Another thing that I would say is you need to make sure that you have your processes kind of ironed out before you go into an integration, because I feel like, and this is going back to more of my previous life, but we looked at buying systems as a patch fix for having not necessarily stellar processes, you need to make sure those processes are aligned to the system and set up the system around good, solid processes. And then at that point, then the automation is kind of like the final key that will help you really realize a whole lot of value. Once you get all of that down, I think that you can have you can have a really phenomenal system that just kind of like things happen, and you don't really need to spend time just making it happen. Maybe just deal with the exceptions and trying to figure out some of the rarities.
All right, thank you guys very much.